The most dangerous lies are never spoken to your face. They are whispered when someone believes you are no longer listening. Ethan Romano stared at the illuminated screen of his phone as the call timer continued climbing long after he had ended the conversation. At first, he assumed it was another minor glitch, something his assistant would complain about later, but then a familiar voice drifted through the speaker with startling clarity. Victoria Blake laughed softly, the polished laugh she reserved for charity galas and business dinners. Yet somehow it sounded colder now that she believed no one important could hear it. Ethan remained motionless inside the quiet study of his Chicago estate, one hand resting against the edge of an enormous mahogany desk polished to a mirror finish, while evening sunlight poured through floor-to-ceiling windows, painting long golden lines across Persian rugs and shelves filled with leather-bound books. He should have disconnected. He should have respected her privacy. Instead, instinct urged him to stay silent. Years of leading an empire had taught him that truth rarely announced itself. It appeared in accidental moments, in careless words, and in conversations people believed were hidden forever. Footsteps echoed faintly through the phone before another voice answered, gentle, respectful, unmistakably Naomi Carter. She had worked in the Romano residence for only 8 months, yet every member of the household trusted her quiet professionalism. Ethan barely knew anything about her beyond her punctual greetings each morning and the remarkable way every room seemed calmer after she had been there. She never asked unnecessary questions. She never lingered where she wasn't needed. She simply worked with quiet dignity that almost disappeared into the background of the mansion. "Miss Blake," Naomi said politely. "Did you need something?" Victoria's pleasant tone vanished so suddenly that Ethan felt his shoulders stiffen. "Close the door," she replied. "I don't want anyone overhearing this." The words were crisp, calculated, completely different from the affectionate woman Ethan believed he was preparing to marry. Naomi hesitated, before answering softly, "Of course." A door clicked shut somewhere inside the mansion. Ethan's heartbeat slowed instead of quickened, the same controlled stillness that settled over him before every important negotiation. Silence became his greatest weapon. "I hope you're remembering your place," Victoria continued, her voice smooth as expensive silk. "People like you sometimes mistake kindness for friendship." Naomi answered after a respectful pause. "I've never forgotten why I'm here, ma'am." "Good," Victoria replied with a quiet laugh. "Because after the wedding, everything changes." Ethan's fingers tightened around the phone without making a sound. The study suddenly felt larger than ever, the ticking grandfather clock louder, the evening air strangely colder despite the summer warmth outside. Victoria continued speaking with effortless confidence, unaware that every carefully chosen word was crossing the invisible line of an open connection. Ethan closed his eyes for only a moment, realizing that the woman speaking now sounded nothing like the one who smiled beside him in photographs. He wasn't hearing an argument. He wasn't witnessing anger. He was listening to someone who finally believed the audience had left, never imagining the only person she feared disappointing had never truly hung up. Naomi lowered her eyes, folded the freshly pressed white dress shirt with careful hands, and placed it neatly into the polished walnut cabinet before answering in the same calm voice she used with everyone in the Romano estate. "I understand, Miss Blake." There was no resentment in her words, no trace of sarcasm, only quiet professionalism that somehow made Victoria's smile sharpen. "Do you?" Victoria asked. "Because from where I stand, it seems you have become a little too comfortable around this house." Naomi remained still. "I only do the work I was hired to do." Another soft laugh echoed through Ethan's phone. It sounded pleasant enough that anyone passing through the hallway would have mistaken it for friendliness. Yet every syllable carried invisible edges. "That is exactly what I want to discuss," Victoria replied. "When I become Mrs. Romano, there will be new rules." Ethan stood perfectly motionless. Outside his study windows, the last light of the evening settled over the gardens where fountains reflected streaks of orange across the water. Everything looked peaceful. Only the tiny speaker in his hand disturbed that illusion. Victoria slowly walked around the laundry room as if inspecting every folded towel and every polished shelf. "You should start looking for another position now," she continued. "It will save everyone unnecessary embarrassment later." Naomi looked genuinely surprised, but did not interrupt. I thought Mr. Romano was satisfied with my work. Oh, he is, Victoria answered smoothly. That is precisely the problem. Silence filled the room for several long seconds. Ethan felt something unfamiliar settle in his chest. He had hired Naomi because the head housekeeper recommended her discipline and reliability. He could barely remember exchanging more than a handful of conversations with her. Yet Victoria spoke as though simple competence itself had become unacceptable. Naomi finally answered with remarkable composure. If my work has caused concern, I apologize. That was never my intention. Victoria folded her arms. You still do not understand. This is not about your work. It is about appearances. Wealthy families have standards. Guests notice everything. They notice who serves dinner. They notice who answers the front door. They notice who is trusted inside private spaces. Naomi nodded once. I have always followed every instruction given to me. You have, Victoria admitted. Which is why I wanted to warn you privately instead of dismissing you publicly after the wedding. Ethan slowly lowered himself into the leather chair behind his desk without taking his eyes from the glowing phone screen. Every instinct he possessed urged him to end the call, confront Victoria immediately, demand an explanation. Instead, experience whispered something different. People revealed far more when they believed they had already won. Naomi carefully placed another stack of freshly folded linens onto the shelf before speaking again. If Mr. Romano wishes me to leave, I will respect his decision. Victoria smiled. You still think this will be his decision? Those words lingered inside the quiet room like an unexpected storm cloud. Ethan stared at the family photograph resting beside his desk, the one Victoria had insisted they frame after announcing their engagement. For the first time since it had been taken, he noticed how carefully every smile in the picture had been arranged. Meanwhile, Naomi simply bowed her head slightly and answered with gentle dignity. I have never wanted anything except the opportunity to earn an honest living. Victoria responded almost casually. That may be true, Naomi, but sometimes honest people still become inconvenient. Ethan closed his eyes for a single breath, realizing that the conversation had quietly crossed an invisible line. He was no longer listening to a disagreement between two women. He was listening to the first crack in a life he believed was built on trust. Naomi looked at Victoria with quiet confusion, but her posture never changed. She neither defended herself nor questioned the accusation. She simply folded another freshly ironed tablecloth and placed it carefully beside the others. Treating the expensive linen with the same respect, she showed every responsibility entrusted to her. If there is anything I have done that has offended you, I would truly appreciate knowing, she said softly. Victoria smiled, although warmth never reached her eyes. That is exactly why you are difficult to deal with, Naomi. You never argue. You never complain. You make everyone believe you are perfect. Naomi lowered her gaze. Nobody is perfect, Miss Blake. Do not pretend humility with me. Victoria stepped closer, her designer heels clicking lightly against the polished marble floor. Do you know why the house staff likes you? Why the security team greets you? Why even Mrs. Henderson keeps praising you? Naomi hesitated before answering honestly. They have always treated me kindly. Victoria let out a quiet laugh. Exactly. They notice you. They respect you. That should never happen. Ethan's expression remained unreadable as every sentence settled deeper than the last. Throughout years of negotiations worth hundreds of millions of dollars, he had learned that envy rarely revealed itself through shouting. It arrived wearing elegance and perfect manners. Victoria continued as though explaining an obvious business principle. A household functions best when everyone remembers their place. Employees should be invisible. They should never become memorable. Naomi answered with sincere calm. I have never tried to draw attention to myself. You did not have to, Victoria replied. You earned it anyway. Ethan slowly leaned back in his chair, his eyes fixed on the fading sunlight outside, while every word sharpened his growing uncertainty. The woman he intended to marry had always spoken about generosity, compassion, and community service during interviews and charity events. Yet this conversation revealed a version of her that sounded carefully hidden beneath polished appearances. Victoria reached into her handbag and removed a cream-colored envelope. I prepared something for you. Naomi accepted it with both hands. Inside was a generous severance check, much larger than several months of salary. Naomi looked at it only briefly before carefully placing it back inside the envelope. I cannot accept this. Victoria tilted her head. Why not? Most people would. Naomi smiled politely. Because I have not earned it. Victoria folded her arms. Think carefully. After the wedding, you will not receive another offer like this. Naomi gently returned the envelope. Money should never become the reason someone leaves with regret. For the first time since the conversation began, Victoria's polished composure cracked ever so slightly. Do you really believe Mr. Romano values loyalty over convenience? Naomi answered without hesitation. I believe he values fairness. Ethan closed his eyes for a brief moment. Those simple words lingered in the silence far longer than any dramatic speech could have. Naomi had no idea he was listening. She had no reason to perform kindness or defend his reputation. She simply answered according to the man she believed he was. Victoria exhaled slowly before speaking again, her voice lower now, almost amused. Fairness is a luxury people like us cannot afford. Influence is what matters. Image is what matters. Once I become Mrs. Romano, every employee in this estate will understand that. Naomi bowed her head respectfully. Then I sincerely hope this home continues to be a place where everyone is treated with dignity. The sentence was delivered without accusation or bitterness. It was little more than a quiet wish. Yet somehow it carried more weight than every carefully crafted word Victoria had spoken. Ethan stared at the silent phone in his hand, realizing that one woman had spent the entire conversation trying to prove her superiority, while the other had done nothing except quietly protect her own dignity. The call ended with a soft electronic tone that seemed almost insignificant compared to the silence it left behind. Ethan remained seated in his study for several long minutes, the phone resting on the polished surface of his desk while the last rays of sunlight disappeared beyond the tall oak trees surrounding the estate. He had negotiated billion-dollar agreements without revealing a single emotion, but this conversation unsettled him in ways no business rival ever had. He replayed every sentence in his mind, searching for evidence that he had misunderstood, that Victoria had been speaking out of temporary frustration, that there was another explanation hidden between the words. Yet every memory returned exactly the same. There had been no anger in her voice, no moment of losing control, only calm certainty. That realization disturbed him more than anything else. Carefully, he reached into the drawer beneath his desk and removed a small leather notebook he rarely used except when something demanded complete accuracy. He wrote only 3 names: Victoria Blake, Naomi Carter, laundry room. Then he closed the notebook again. Experience had taught him never to make important decisions during the first emotional reaction. Facts always deserve patience. The following morning, the Romano estate awakened as it always did. Fresh coffee filled the kitchen before sunrise. Gardeners trimmed the hedges surrounding the circular driveway. Delivery trucks arrived with flowers for the upcoming engagement celebration. From the balcony outside his office, Ethan quietly observed the familiar rhythm of the household below. Naomi crossed the courtyard carrying fresh linens toward the guest wing. She greeted every employee with the same warm smile regardless of position. The groundskeeper tipped his hat. The kitchen staff wished her a good morning. Even the elderly housekeeper, Mrs. Henderson, gently squeezed Naomi's shoulder before handing her a clipboard. None of them behaved like people trying to impress the future wife of the estate owner. They behaved like people who genuinely respected someone who had earned their trust one ordinary day at a time. Ethan watched without revealing himself. 10 minutes later, Victoria arrived for breakfast wearing an elegant cream-colored dress and carrying a bouquet of white roses she insisted on placing in the dining room herself. She greeted every employee gracefully. She complimented the chef. She thanked the butler. She even smiled warmly at Naomi as though the previous evening had never happened. Good morning, Naomi, Victoria said sweetly. Everything looks beautiful today. Naomi smiled politely. Thank you, Miss Blake. I hope you enjoy breakfast. There was no sign of resentment in her voice. No attempt to expose what had been said behind closed doors. She simply continued arranging fresh fruit at the center of the dining table before quietly stepping away. Ethan studied both women from the hallway without announcing his presence. The contrast was impossible to ignore. One carefully managed every expression for the people watching. The other behaved exactly the same whether anyone important was nearby or not. Before leaving for his downtown office, Ethan stopped beside Mrs. Henderson. The older woman had managed the Romano household for nearly 30 years and had witnessed 3 generations of family history. "How is Naomi adjusting?" he asked casually. Mrs. Henderson smiled with genuine affection. "Better than anyone expected. She notices what needs to be done before anyone asks. She stays late when another employee becomes ill. Last week, she spent her lunch break helping the new housekeeper learn the inventory system because she did not want the young woman to feel embarrassed." Ethan nodded thoughtfully. "Has she ever caused problems?" Mrs. Henderson looked honestly puzzled. "Problems? Mr. Romano, if every employee carried themselves with her integrity, I could retire tomorrow without a single concern." Ethan thanked her and walked toward the front entrance, but every answer only deepened the question forming inside him. For the first time in many years, he wondered whether the greatest mistake in his life was not something he had done, but someone he had trusted without ever looking closely enough. The question followed Ethan all the way to his downtown office, lingering between board meetings, financial reports, and conversations he barely remembered having. Every time someone spoke, another memory surfaced instead. Naomi quietly refusing money she had not earned. Victoria calmly describing dignity as an inconvenience. By late afternoon, Ethan canceled the remainder of his schedule for the first time in months and returned to the estate without informing anyone. He entered through the service entrance rather than the grand front doors, choosing the path used by the household employees every day. It was a part of his own home he rarely visited, yet it reflected the heartbeat of the entire estate. Stainless steel counters gleamed beneath bright lights. Fresh bread cooled on wire racks in the kitchen. Laundry carts rolled silently through spotless hallways. Nothing appeared unusual. Nobody seemed anxious. If not for the conversation he had overheard, he would have believed everything was exactly as it should be. Rather than announce himself, Ethan continued walking unnoticed through the corridor until he reached the small employee dining room. The lunch hour had nearly ended. A handful of staff members sat around simple wooden tables, sharing coffee before returning to work. Naomi occupied the seat closest to the window with a homemade sandwich wrapped in wax paper and a paperback library book resting beside her plate. She laughed quietly as one of the younger housekeepers described accidentally dropping an entire basket of fresh towels into the indoor fountain that morning. The room filled with gentle laughter, not at the young employee, but with her. There was comfort in the way they spoke to one another, the kind built over ordinary days rather than dramatic moments. Naomi listened more than she talked. When someone else entered carrying an empty tray, she immediately stood and offered her own chair without hesitation. The older employee smiled gratefully before accepting. Nobody applauded the gesture. Nobody even seemed surprised. It was simply what Naomi always did. Ethan remained hidden around the corner, watching without interfering. A few minutes later, Mrs. Henderson entered carrying a stack of schedules that slipped from her hands as she reached for the door. Before anyone else reacted, Naomi was already kneeling to gather every page in the correct order. She checked the page numbers twice before handing them back with a warm smile. "Thank you, dear," Mrs. Henderson said. "I keep telling myself I should slow down." Naomi smiled gently. "Then let me help you do that." There was nothing dramatic about the exchange. Yet Ethan found himself noticing something he had overlooked for months. Naomi never seemed interested in being noticed. Every thoughtful action disappeared almost as quickly as it happened, leaving only the people around her feeling a little lighter. As the employees returned to work, Naomi remained behind long enough to wipe the tables, organize the chairs, and refill the coffee supplies even though another department was assigned that responsibility. She looked toward the hallway to make certain no one needed assistance before quietly picking up her cleaning cart and continuing through the mansion with the same calm pace as always. Ethan slowly stepped into the now empty dining room. The forgotten library book still rested on the table for just a moment before Naomi hurried back, embarrassed that she had left it behind. She stopped when she saw him standing there. Surprise crossed her face, but only for an instant. "Good afternoon, Mr. Romano," she said politely. "I apologize. I did not realize anyone was using the room." Ethan looked at the worn library label on the cover before handing the book back to her. It was a biography of a teacher who had devoted decades to serving underserved communities. Naomi accepted it with quiet gratitude. "Thank you, sir." She offered a respectful smile, wished him a pleasant afternoon, and continued down the hallway without another word. Ethan watched until she disappeared around the corner, realizing that genuine character often revealed itself not during extraordinary moments, but in the countless ordinary choices made when no one important appeared to be watching. The following morning, Ethan arrived at the estate before sunrise, long before the first delivery truck rolled through the front gate or the kitchen lights flickered on. The mansion felt different in the quiet hours, stripped of formal dinners and polished appearances, revealing the routines that truly kept everything running. Instead of heading toward his office, he walked into the security room where dozens of monitors displayed every hallway, entrance, and shared workspace. Daniel Brooks, the head of security, immediately stood. "Good morning, Mr. Romano." Ethan nodded once. "I need to review recordings from the past 3 months." Daniel looked surprised, but asked no questions. Loyalty inside the Romano organization had always been built on discretion. Within minutes, archived footage appeared across the screens. Ethan watched ordinary days unfold one after another. Naomi greeting delivery drivers with a smile. Naomi helping an elderly florist carry heavy arrangements into the ballroom. Naomi quietly cleaning spilled coffee before anyone slipped. Nothing seemed unusual until Victoria appeared. At first, the encounters looked harmless. A brief instruction in the hallway. A conversation near the library. A request in the kitchen. Yet Ethan noticed something he had never paid attention to before. Every time Victoria approached Naomi, the nearby employees instinctively found reasons to leave the area. It was subtle, almost invisible, but impossible to ignore once he recognized the pattern. "Can you isolate the audio from this hallway?" Ethan asked. Daniel shook his head. "Those cameras do not record conversations, only video." Ethan continued watching. On another recording, Victoria handed Naomi a stack of decorative menus moments before guests arrived for a charity luncheon. Minutes later, Victoria returned, frowned dramatically, and pointed toward one menu as though discovering an error. Naomi quietly apologized despite checking every page twice before replacing them. Ethan paused the recording. "Who printed those?" Daniel opened the event log stored on the computer. According to the records, the menus were revised by Miss Blake about 20 minutes before the luncheon. Ethan remained silent. Another recording showed Victoria asking Naomi to move floral arrangements from the west dining room to the east ballroom. Less than 10 minutes later, she criticized Naomi for following the instruction because the flowers were suddenly in the wrong location. Again, Naomi accepted responsibility without arguing. Ethan requested maintenance logs, scheduling records, and staff reports from previous events. One document after another revealed the same quiet pattern. Small situations, tiny misunderstandings, innocent mistakes that somehow always placed Naomi in an uncomfortable position while allowing Victoria to appear patient and gracious in front of everyone else. None of the incidents were serious by themselves. Together, they formed something far more troubling. Daniel leaned forward as another report appeared. "This is interesting." Ethan read the page carefully. 3 separate employees had privately requested schedule changes during weeks when Victoria frequently visited the estate. Each request included almost identical wording. They wanted to avoid unnecessary conflict. None of them had filed formal complaints. None had mentioned Victoria by name. They simply asked to work different shifts. Ethan closed the folder slowly. People who feared conflict often hid the source instead of confronting it. "Has Naomi ever submitted a complaint?" he asked. Daniel searched the employee database before shaking his head. "Not once. No disciplinary reports. No requests for transfer. No grievances." Ethan looked back at the frozen image of Naomi on the monitor, carrying a tray of fresh towels down a quiet hallway with the same calm expression she always wore. She had never attempted to defend herself. She had never tried to expose anyone else. Instead, she had continued doing her job with steady professionalism while someone quietly worked to undermine her one small moment at a time. Ethan finally understood why the conversation he had overheard sounded so practiced. It had not been the beginning of Victoria's plan. It had merely been the first time he had accidentally heard the truth behind months of carefully hidden behavior. By the end of the week, the Romano estate seemed more alive than ever. Luxury vehicles arrived one after another beneath the sweeping stone entrance. Florists carried towering white arrangements into the ballroom. Event planners measured every table twice before approving the final layout. Caterers polished crystal glasses until they reflected the chandeliers overhead like tiny mirrors. Everyone believed they were preparing for the official celebration that would announce Ethan and Victoria's wedding date to close friends, business partners, and respected members of the community. Victoria moved confidently through every room, greeting vendors with effortless charm and thanking employees with graceful smiles that impressed everyone who watched. She looked exactly like the future lady of the estate she had always imagined becoming. Ethan remained equally composed. He approved decorations, welcomed arriving guests, and complimented the staff on their work with the same calm professionalism he always displayed. Nothing about his expression suggested that anything had changed. Yet beneath that quiet exterior, every detail of the evening had been carefully rearranged according to a plan known only to him and one trusted member of his security team. Naomi spent the afternoon helping transform the ballroom into a place worthy of the celebration. She adjusted centerpieces until every candle stood perfectly straight. She checked each place setting, making certain every fork, spoon, and glass aligned with meticulous precision. When another employee accidentally damaged one of the floral displays, Naomi quietly stayed an extra 30 minutes to rebuild the arrangement before anyone else noticed. She never complained about the additional work. She simply smiled and assured the anxious young employee that everything would be ready before the guests arrived. Mrs. Henderson watched the exchange with quiet admiration before whispering to another housekeeper. She always protects people before protecting herself. Ethan happened to hear those words while passing through the hallway. He said nothing, but they remained with him long after he continued toward the ballroom. As evening settled over the estate, soft music floated through the grand hall, while conversations blended with the gentle sound of crystal glasses meeting in polite celebration. Distinguished guests complimented the elegant decorations and praised Victoria's impeccable taste. She accepted every compliment with practiced humility, occasionally reaching for Ethan's hand as photographers captured smiling images that appeared destined for society magazines. Across the room, Naomi moved almost unnoticed in her neatly pressed black and white uniform, quietly refilling water glasses, collecting empty plates, and making certain every guest felt welcomed. She never interrupted conversations. She never sought attention. She simply carried herself with the same quiet dignity that had defined every ordinary day inside the mansion. Ethan observed the room carefully instead of joining the endless stream of conversations. He noticed something he had overlooked countless times before. Nearly every employee relaxed whenever Naomi approached. A nervous server regained confidence after Naomi offered a reassuring smile. An elderly guest searching for the nearest restroom received calm directions before she could even ask. A child attending with his parents dropped a cloth napkin beneath the table, and Naomi gently retrieved it while speaking to him with genuine kindness that made the boy grin from ear to ear. These were small moments, almost invisible beside the elegance of the evening. Yet together they revealed a kind of character that could never be staged for applause. Victoria eventually stepped onto the small platform prepared for speeches and raised her glass with radiant confidence. Guests gradually turned their attention toward her, their conversations fading into respectful silence. Ethan remained standing near the front of the ballroom, his expression unreadable as he looked across the room. Naomi quietly positioned herself near the rear entrance beside the other household employees, believing the evening would unfold exactly as everyone expected. None of the guests realized they were about to witness something entirely different from the celebration printed on their invitations, and the calm silence settling over the ballroom carried the unmistakable feeling that the truth had finally arrived exactly where it belonged. Victoria smiled with complete confidence as she welcomed the distinguished guests and thanked them for sharing such an important evening with her and Ethan. Her voice carried easily through the ballroom, warm and polished, exactly as everyone expected. She spoke about family, loyalty, and the future they would build together. Every sentence sounded carefully rehearsed. Every smile appeared effortless. Around the room, glasses were raised in celebration while photographers quietly captured the elegant scene. Ethan listened without interruption, his expression calm enough that no one questioned what would happen next. When Victoria finished, she stepped toward him expecting him to continue the ceremony exactly as planned. Instead, Ethan accepted the microphone with measured composure and waited several seconds before speaking. The room gradually became silent. "Thank you all for joining us this evening," he began. "Many of you have known my family for years. Some of you have built businesses with me. Others have become trusted friends. Every relationship represented in this room depends on one thing above all else: trust." Guests nodded politely, assuming another heartfelt engagement speech was beginning. Ethan continued in the same steady voice. "Over the past week, I have been reminded that trust should never be based only on appearances. It must be earned by character, especially when no one believes they are being observed." Victoria glanced toward him with mild curiosity, her smile remaining in place, although uncertainty briefly crossed her eyes. Ethan reached into his jacket pocket and removed his phone. "Several days ago, I experienced something completely unexpected. A conversation continued after a call should have ended. I did not seek it. I did not interrupt it. But once I realized what I was hearing, I also realized I had a responsibility to understand the truth before making the most important decision of my life." The ballroom became so quiet that even the soft music from the string quartet seemed distant. Victoria's expression slowly changed as recognition settled across her face. Ethan looked toward the sound technician standing discreetly near the stage and gave a single nod. A clear recording filled the ballroom. Victoria's own voice echoed through the speakers exactly as it had days before. Calm, confident, unaware that anyone important could hear her. Guests listened as she questioned Naomi's place inside the household, dismissed dignity as unimportant, and explained that influence mattered more than fairness. Then Naomi's gentle replies followed. Respectful, humble, free from bitterness. Nobody spoke while the recording played. Nobody moved. The silence itself seemed to grow heavier with every passing sentence. When the final words faded away, Ethan quietly lowered the microphone. No dramatic accusation followed. No raised voices interrupted the stillness. The recording had already spoken more honestly than any speech ever could. Victoria stared across the ballroom, searching the faces of friends and colleagues who only moments earlier had admired her. Now she found only thoughtful silence. Ethan turned toward the household employees standing near the rear of the room. His eyes settled on Naomi, who remained frozen in place, clearly shocked that a private conversation had become known to everyone. She looked neither triumphant nor relieved. She simply appeared uncomfortable that attention had fallen upon her. Ethan addressed the room once more. "Over the past several days, I reviewed records, spoke with members of my staff, and carefully examined what I had failed to notice before. I discovered that genuine character is revealed through ordinary choices repeated over time, not carefully prepared public appearances. Tonight was never intended to celebrate appearances. It was intended to honor the truth." The ballroom remained completely still, and in that profound silence, every carefully maintained illusion quietly gave way to something far more powerful than reputation. It gave way to honesty. The silence lingered for several long moments before Ethan slowly stepped down from the platform and crossed the ballroom without hurry. Every guest instinctively moved aside, creating a clear path that led toward the back of the room, where Naomi still stood in her neatly pressed uniform, her hands folded gently in front of her as though she wished she could disappear into the background once again. She looked overwhelmed by the attention surrounding her, not because she feared judgment, but because she had never sought recognition. Ethan stopped a few feet away from her. For the first time since the evening had begun, he did not speak as the head of an influential family or as the host of an elegant celebration. He spoke simply as one person addressing another. "Naomi," he said quietly, "I owe you an apology." The room remained completely still. Naomi looked up with visible surprise. "Mr. Romano, there is no need." Ethan gently shook his head. "There is every need. I believed I understood the people closest to me, yet I failed to notice what was happening inside my own home. I heard one conversation by accident, but I should have seen the truth long before that." Naomi lowered her eyes respectfully. "You trusted the people around you. That is not something to apologize for." Ethan smiled faintly, although there was sadness behind it. Trust is valuable, but so is responsibility. The people who work in this house deserve to know they will always be treated with fairness and respect. That responsibility belongs to me. Without another word, he inclined his head toward Naomi in a quiet gesture of gratitude. It was neither dramatic nor theatrical. It was simply sincere. A soft murmur spread through the ballroom as guests witnessed a moment no expensive celebration could ever have created. Mrs. Henderson discreetly wiped away a tear. Several employees exchanged emotional glances, realizing that someone had finally spoken aloud what they had quietly believed for months. Naomi looked genuinely uncomfortable receiving such attention. "I only came here to do honest work," she answered softly. "This house gave me an opportunity when I needed one. I have always been grateful." Ethan nodded. "And you honored that opportunity every single day." He then turned to face the assembled guests once more. "Tonight has reminded me that success is measured by far more than wealth, influence, or reputation. The true character of any home, any business, or any family is revealed by the way it treats people who expect nothing in return except simple respect." No applause followed immediately. Instead, thoughtful silence filled the room, allowing every word to settle naturally. One by one, guests began acknowledging the household employees with appreciative smiles and quiet expressions of gratitude. Conversations changed. People who had previously walked past the staff without a second thought now paused to thank them personally for their work. The atmosphere inside the ballroom no longer felt like a formal celebration built upon appearances. It felt like something far more genuine. Later that evening, after the final guests had departed and the last candles had been extinguished, Naomi quietly returned to folding linens in the same laundry room where everything had begun. Nothing about her routine had changed. She still completed each task with patience, care, and quiet dignity. As Ethan passed the open doorway, he paused for only a moment before continuing down the hallway with a deeper understanding than he had carried only days before. Some people command attention through titles. Others earn lasting respect through character. Those two things are not the same. And on that quiet evening, inside a home where appearances had once seemed more important than truth, everyone present remembered what dignity truly looks like.